I have a bit of a confession to make this morning, which is that yesterday evening we were serving the Vespers service here in church, and we finished the Vespers service, and I turned around to give a sermon, and somehow I had gotten into my head that the gospel reading for today was the story of the 10 lepers. I don't know how that had gotten into my head, but for some reason I was convinced that that was the gospel reading for today. I think that after getting sick last weekend, my brain is maybe still not working entirely correctly. You know, some people who I didn't get COVID, but some people who get COVID say that they get COVID brain afterwards. Well, I think I have strep throat brain today, or yesterday at least. But in a way, I'm glad that I preached and talked a little bit about the story of the 10 lepers yesterday, because I was thinking, and I realized my mistake as I was setting things up yesterday evening for today. I realized my error. And I was thinking there actually are some connections between the story of the 10 lepers and the story of Zacchaeus that we have today. Because what happens, let's remind ourselves, in that story of the 10 lepers, 10 men who had leprosy came to Jesus hoping to be healed. And leprosy, of course, was a disease that at the time, as a very serious infectious disease. If you had leprosy, you couldn't come into the city, you couldn't come into the temple. There was a whole slew of things that you could not do. You were so restricted because they didn't want you to pass on that disease to other people. So they come to Jesus looking to be healed from their leprosy. And Jesus simply says to them, "Go and show yourself to the priest." Now, there was a rule that we read about in the Old Testament, that if a person had leprosy, and they thought that they had been healed, they had been cured from that leprosy, before they could rejoin society, so to speak, they had to go to the priest. And the priest would inspect them to make sure, yes, the leprosy has gone. Or the priest might say, no, not quite yet, maybe a few months, and then the leprosy would have gone. So Jesus simply says to these men, go and show yourselves to the priest. He doesn't say you're healed. He doesn't bother doing any of that. He doesn't make them go and wash themselves or do any of the different things that he's done in other cases of healing that we read about in the New Testament. Instead, he simply says, go and show yourself to the priest. And these 10 men walk away, and as they're walking away from Jesus, they are healed from their leprosy. Now imagine, Jesus has done such an incredible thing for them. He's healed them miraculously from this disease. But more than that, he has allowed them to pick their lives back up. He's allowed them to again go about their business, to interact with their family in the usual way that they would like to. He's done an absolutely incredible thing for them. And yet 9 out of 10 of those men failed to show any sort of gratitude whatsoever. It's only one man, a Samaritan, who happens to turn around and offer to Jesus his thanksgiving. This is the story of the 10 lepers. Now we have in today's gospel reading the story of Zacchaeus, and I want to just draw a little bit of a contrast between those 9, at least, ungrateful lepers and the case of Zacchaeus. Those nine lepers were healed. They were given this wonderful, amazing gift, and they failed to show any sort of gratitude whatsoever. Zacchaeus is simply invited to dinner, and he changes his entire way of life. Just that small, actually, it isn't even that he's invited to dinner. Jesus invites himself to dinner at Zacchaeus' house. And simply from that one act, Zacchaeus, in his gratitude to Jesus Christ, entirely changes his way of life. Zacchaeus, we read, was a tax collector. And tax collectors, to this day, are not the most popular people in the world. None of us like the IRS. But at this time, tax collectors were especially seen as being the lowest of the low. I mean, absolutely, they were despised for what they did. Why? Because the tax collectors were Jewish people who were collecting taxes from their fellow Jews on behalf of the Roman Empire. They were the ones who were colluding with the occupiers, the Roman Empire, who were trying to control the lives and the religious practice of the Jewish people. The tax collectors were these people who had joined forces, so to speak, with the Roman Empire. And they would collect taxes from people, and as they were collecting taxes, they would collect from everybody a little bit more than what that person actually owed, to line their own pocket. They needed their own salary. And so the tax collectors were people who were looked down upon quite a bit, and maybe justly so, for the things that they were doing to their fellow Jewish people. Zacchaeus, we read, was a rich man. He was one of the chief tax collectors. He was the head of the IRS, so to speak. He had made lots of money unjustly through his collection of taxes. But he heard that Jesus was passing through the city, passing through Jericho. And there was such a big crowd that had gathered to see Jesus, to hear him speak, that Zacchaeus realized, I'm not going to be able to see him. He's a short man. And so he climbs up into a sycamore tree. And eventually, in God knows 2 years, 3 years, when we get to go and visit the Holy Land, as we're planning on doing this year, we'll get to go to Jericho, and we'll get to see those sycamore trees. Of course, the one that Zacchaeus climbed is no longer there. They don't live that long. But we'll be able to see those trees, and they're large. They're big trees, like the ones that Zacchaeus climbed up to see Jesus. And Jesus, as he came into Jericho, sees Zacchaeus up in that tree. He says to him, Zacchaeus, make haste, come down, hurry, get down from that tree, because I have to go to your house today. I'm going to stay with you today, so get down from that tree. Now imagine if you heard that a king was going to be staying at your house. Imagine if you heard that a powerful, important person was going to be coming over and dining and staying at your house. Think about how many things you'd have to do to prepare. And in fact, once I was giving a sermon to a group of kids, and I asked them, what would you do if you knew that a king was coming to stay at your house? And they were given all sorts of suggestions about cooking a good meal and cleaning up really thoroughly, making sure everything was absolutely spotless. They gave these wonderful images of what they would do to prepare for that king who was coming to be at their house. What was that?
Show off the icons.
You could show off all your icons to that king. Sure, that'd be great. That'd be great. Well, Zacchaeus hears that Jesus is coming to his house. He has little time to prepare. He has little time to clean up, prepare a meal for him. And Jesus is not just any old king. Jesus is the King of heaven and earth. Jesus is, as we say, the icon that we see in the dome up above us. It's called Pandokrata, which means he who has dominion over all. He who rules over all. Jesus Christ is the King, not just of an earthly empire, not just of an earthly nation, but the King and the Creator of the heavens and the earth. And he's coming to dine at the house of Zacchaeus. He's coming to stay at the house of Zacchaeus. But Zacchaeus, hearing this news, that Christ is coming to be with him, doesn't express what I think most of us would express: worry and say, oh no, I'm not ready. I have to put all my clothes away. I have to make a good meal. No. Anxiety, panic. Oh, I can't have a guest right now. Instead, Zacchaeus simply receives him with joy, receives him into his home, receives Christ into his own house with a joyful heart. And the people who see Jesus Christ going into the house of this tax collector. They've been looking, of course, for a way to accuse Jesus. They see him going into Zacchaeus' house, and they say, look, he's going in to be the guest of a tax collector, of a man who was a sinner. Terrible, terrible sinner. And Zacchaeus, knowing that they were saying these sorts of things, says to Christ, behold, Lord, half of my goods I give to the poor. He's going to get rid of half of the things he owns. Give away that money to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. So any money throughout my career as a tax collector that I have taken unjustly, he says, I'm going to make that right. And I'm going to make it more than right and restore it fourfold to that person. He has this radical and complete change in his heart and in his way of life. Out of his gratefulness for having received Jesus Christ into his own home. Christ hadn't healed him of anything. Christ hadn't worked any miracles for him. Christ hadn't cast out any demons from him. Christ hadn't done any of those sorts of things. Christ had simply gone in to be his guest, and his life was transformed. His life was absolutely changed because of the gratitude that he had for Christ. And now I'm going to drop the bomb, so to speak, which is that Christ wants to be the guest of each and every one of you. Christ wants to come into your home and dine with you there. Christ wants to stay with you at your house. Make haste and come down, because Christ must stay with you today. We are going to receive in just a little bit into our own bodies the body and blood of Jesus Christ. Christ is entering not simply into our home, but into our heart, into the very center, into the very core of who we are as human beings, so that there he could transform us just as he transformed Zacchaeus on that day. And so think again, the King is coming to be with you. And so what are you going to do to prepare for him? What are you going to do to make way for his presence in your heart? Clean up. Sweep out the vices, the sins that are keeping your heart from being a fitting resting place for Jesus Christ. Cook him a good meal. Practice the virtues so that you can have an offering in your life to show Christ that his presence within you is not in vain, but is working that transformation that we all pray for. Jesus Christ is coming to be with each and every one of us. And so let us prepare for his coming, and let us receive him into our home and into our heart with joy, so that we could hear his voice saying to us, today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Amen.